The Covenant of Scars wasn't written in ink. It was etched in memory, a living archive of every slight, every wound, and every death suffered by a human since we'd stumbled onto the galactic stage. My name is Kalen, and I was its keeper on Viridian Gyre. I was no warrior, no diplomat, no leader. I was an archivist, a quiet man in a quiet room whose only job was to remember. The Gyre itself was a testament to forgotten things, a massive, hollowed-out asteroid tumbling through the fringe systems, its guts laced with veins of coltan and nickel. It was a place of rust and echoes, where the hiss of recycled air was the only constant song. We shared this rock with the stroma, an insectoid species of cold pragmatists who communicated in clicks and pheromones, their chitinous bodies moving with an unnerving efficiency that made our soft, fleshy chaos seem like a design flaw. The piece between us was a threadbare sheet, stretched taut over a bed of knives. It held only because of the rule, a principle so old and so blood-soaked that it had become a kind of galactic superstition: you don't hurt humans. It wasn't our law. It was the one we'd forced everyone else to learn. The stroma, with their hive mind logic, understood the rule, not as a moral imperative, but as a calculated risk assessment. The potential for disproportionate, species-wide retribution for harming even one human was an inefficient outcome. And so, for the most part, they complied. My days were spent in the archive, a pressurized cavern near the asteroid's core, where holographic displays cast a soft blue glow on walls of raw, pockmarked stone. I curated the data, cross-referencing shipping manifests with coroner's reports, parsing miners' complaints for patterns of harassment, logging every stroma overseer who worked a human crew past their designated shift limit. Each entry was a potential spark, and it was my job to watch for fire. Most days, the work was mundane. A stroma guard shoves a human dock worker. A human child is denied rations at a shared commissary. These were small things, grievances that could be smoothed over by Mara, our crew chief and unofficial mayor. Mara was all hard edges and weary strength. A woman who had seen the last war and had no stomach for a new one. She believed in diplomacy, in channels, in the slow, grinding bureaucracy of the core world's accords. We don't need to burn the house down every time we see a spider, Kyle, she'd tell me, her voice rough from years of shouting over the roar of mining equipment. But I knew history. Spiders, left unchecked. Spin webs. I'd seen the records. Every major conflict, every burned colony, every shattered fleet began not with a bang, but with a small, calculated act of disrespect. It always started with someone testing the boundaries, someone forgetting the cost, someone who thought the old stories were just myths. And that's what worried me most, the slow, creeping amnesia that seemed to be spreading through the younger stroma broods. They hadn't seen the starfire of our retribution. To them, the rule was just a dusty old protocol, the heart of the human sector. Our small corner of this floating rock wasn't the mess hall or Mara's office. It was the garden, tucked away in a decommissioned hydroponics bay. It was the only place on Viridian Gyre where real soil, black and rich and hauled across 5 systems at ruinous cost, cradled living things. It wasn't for food. It was a memorial. Tiny, hand-carved plates of nickel, each bearing a name, stood half-hidden amongst hardy, pale-leafed ferns and the stubborn, violet blossoms of luna moths. Each name was a human miner lost to the gyre, a tunnel collapse, an equipment malfunction, a suit breach. It was a place of profound and aching silence, tended by a girl they called Echo. She was maybe 10 years old, a whisper of a child with wide, serious eyes and dirt permanently smudged on her cheeks. Her parents were names in that garden, and she cared for the place with a fierce, solemn devotion, watering the plants with recycled water and polishing the nameplates until they shone. The garden was our covenant made tangible, a quiet declaration that we remembered our own, that every life had weight. The Stroma considered it a grotesque waste of resources. Their dead were recycled, their components broken down and repurposed for the good of the hive. To them, our sentimentality was not just a weakness, it was an inefficiency, the greatest sin in their rigid cosmology. The trouble began, as it always does, with a new arrival. His designation was Hive Supervisor Vex, a younger Stroma dispatched from their core worlds, his carapace a polished, arrogant black, his movements sharp with the certainty of one who has never known failure. He saw Viridian Gyre not as a community, but as a resource to be optimized. And the first inefficiency on his list was the garden. I was in the archive when Mara's comm call came through, her voice tight with a fury she was trying to contain. "You need to see this. Kyle, now." When I arrived, a crowd of human miners had already gathered at the entrance to the hydroponics bay, their faces a mixture of shock and anger. In the center of the bay stood Vex, flanked by two of his drone guards. Echo was there, standing in front of a patch of Luna moths like a tiny, terrified soldier, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Vex was speaking, his translated voice a flat, synthetic monotone that grated on the ear. "This space is designated for reclamation. Per subsection 4 of the Joint Operational Charter, all non-essential, non-productive allocations of space are subject to hive review. This memorial is an inefficient use of valuable station real estate." He gestured dismissively with a clawed hand. "It will be paved and repurposed for a tertiary ore processing unit. You have 1 cycle to remove your personal effects." A low growl rumbled through the crowd. An old miner named Griggs, whose brother's name was on one of the nickel plates, took a step forward. "That's sacred ground. You son of a bitch." One of the drones leveled its pulse rifle, and Griggs froze. Mara stepped between them, her body a solid wall of defiance. "Supervisor, this garden is protected under the cultural preservation clauses of the Accords. It is a place of remembrance for our dead." Vex tilted his head, the gesture conveying an infuriating sense of detached curiosity. "Your emotional attachments are not a factor in hive productivity metrics. The processing unit will increase ore refinement by 6%. That is a tangible and quantifiable benefit. Your remembrance is not. The decision is final." He turned to leave, his drones moving with him in perfect, menacing synchronicity. Echo finally spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "You can't. Their names are here." Vex paused at the doorway, but didn't turn around. "Names are merely data, and data can be stored more efficiently elsewhere." And then he was gone, leaving behind a silence that was heavier and more dangerous than any shout. The crowd erupted. Voices rose in anger, some calling for a strike, others for a fight. "This is how it starts," someone yelled. "They push and push until we fall over." Mara raised her hands, trying to impose order. "Everybody calm down. We will file a formal protest with the Guild. We will cite the Accords. There are procedures for this." But even as she spoke, I could see the doubt in her eyes. She knew as well as I did that by the time a protest made its way through the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the Stroma Guild, the garden would be nothing but a concrete slab. I said nothing. I just watched Echo, who had knelt and was now tracing the name on one of the plates with her finger, her small shoulders shaking. In that moment, I felt the immense, crushing weight of the archive. I saw the patterns, the historical precedents, the 100 other times on 100 other worlds where a final decision had been the prelude to a massacre. Mara wanted to follow the new rules. The miners wanted to fall back on the old ways of fists and fury. But both were wrong. A formal protest was a declaration of weakness, an admission that we needed a higher authority to protect us. A riot was a suicide note, giving the Stroma the perfect excuse to bring in their enforcers and pacify the human sector for good. This wasn't a problem to be solved with paperwork or pipe wrenches. Vex had made a move on a chessboard he didn't understand, seeing only a wasted square of real estate, blind to the fact that he had just threatened the king. I returned to the archive, the angry shouts of the miners fading behind me. I sealed the door, and the blue glow of the holoscreens enveloped me. The air grew still, and I could hear the faint hum of the data cores, whispering their litanies of forgotten names and unforgiven sins. I wasn't looking for battle plans or weapons schematics. The Covenant of Scars was not an armory. It was a map of connections, of debts, of dependencies, of pain. I pulled up every file related to Hive Supervisor Vex, his brood lineage, his service record, his logistical authorizations. I ran deep structure analyses on the Stroma mining operations on Viridian Gyre, their supply chains, their energy consumption, their output quotas. The Stroma saw the universe as a complex machine, and I was looking for the one loose screw, the single gear that, if it stopped turning, would bring the whole apparatus grinding to a halt. It took me 7 hours. My eyes burned from staring at the glowing script, but I didn't stop. I traced shipping routes back through 3 sectors, cross-referenced cargo manifests with guild contracts, and peeled back layers of corporate shell companies. And then I found it. It was beautiful in its simplicity. A single point of failure hidden in plain sight. The new tertiary ore processing unit, the one Vex was so proud of, the one that required the garden to be paved, relied on a unique, hyper-efficient cooling system. That system, in turn, required a constant supply of a rare, cryogenically stable gas isotope, Helion-4, according to the manifests. There was only one licensed supplier of refined Helion-4 in the entire fringe sector, a freighter captain named Jorik. I smiled, a thin, cold expression that felt alien on my face. I opened a new file. A deep archive entry from 12 standard years ago. A mining disaster on a moon called Charon's Tier. A Stroma crew had abandoned their human partners during a seismic event, sealing a bulkhead to save their own equipment and leaving 12 humans to die. But one had survived. A young engineer who had been pinned under a collapsed gantry, his suit's oxygen running out. He was saved by a grizzled freighter pilot who ignored Stroma quarantine orders and cut his way through the bulkhead to pull the man out. The engineer's name was Finn. The pilot who saved him was Jorik. Finn's name was not in the garden on Viridian Gyre, but his father's was Griggs, the old miner who had stood up to Vex. I pulled up Jorik's public comm frequency and opened a secure, encrypted channel, routing it through 3 dead-drop relays. My message was short, containing only an image of the garden, a close-up of the nameplate that read Abram Griggs, and a single line of text. They are paving this for a new processing unit. The unit requires your Helion-4. Remember Charon's tear. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. The Covenant of Scars was not about my name. It was about theirs. I leaned back in my chair, the hollow screens reflecting in my tired eyes. Mira could file her protests. The miners could sharpen their tools. They thought the battle was for a patch of dirt. I knew it was for a principle. Violence wasn't always loud. Sometimes, the most devastating blow was a quiet word, a remembered debt, a shipment that simply never arrives. Up in his sterile office, Hive Supervisor Vex was celebrating his victory over sentimentality. He had no idea that a ghost from a forgotten moon was about to teach him the real meaning of the word inefficient. The rule wasn't about hurting us. It was about what we remembered when you tried. The cycle following Vex's decree passed in a state of suspended animation. A heavy, charged silence settled over the human sector, thick with unspoken threats and the metallic taste of fear. Mara was a whirlwind of activity, drafting formal petitions, citing precedents from long-dead tribunals, her face grim with the Sisyphean effort of pushing a boulder of bureaucracy up a mountain of indifference. The miners were a coiled spring of rage. They moved in tight, watchful groups, their hands never straying far from the heavy spanners and cutting torches that hung from their belts. Every click of a passing Stroma patrol sounded like a cocking rifle. In the garden, Echo continued her work, a small, defiant figure of solitude. She watered the ferns under the cold, unblinking eye of a Stroma survey drone that Vex had positioned overhead, a silent promise of the concrete to come. I remained in the archive, watching the station's vital signs, waiting. I knew my message to Yorick was a seed planted in uncertain soil. It could wither and die, or it could grow into a thorny vine that would choke Vex's ambitions. Patience, I reminded myself, was a weapon the Stroma, with their hive-driven immediacy, rarely mastered. The first tremor came not as a shout, but as a flicker of text on the station's public shipping ledger. Jorik's freighter, the Nomad, scheduled to arrive with its precious cargo of Helion-4, was now listed as delayed. The reason cited was drive coil malfunction. It was a standard, boilerplate excuse, utterly plausible and completely deniable. I allowed myself a small, internal nod of satisfaction. Yorick remembered. Vex's response was immediate and predictable. He flooded the public channels with official inquiries, demanding specifics, repair timelines, and threatening contractual penalties. The replies from the Nomad were slow, intermittent, and maddeningly vague. Experiencing unforeseen particle shear. Diagnostic cycles are ongoing. Cannot provide a reliable ETA at this time. It was a masterful performance of bureaucratic jujitsu, using the weight of the Stroma's own rigid system against them. Vex, a being who saw the universe as a series of solvable equations, was now faced with an irrational variable, and it infuriated him. His frustration bled out into the station's atmosphere. Stroma patrols in the human sector doubled. Rations were subjected to meticulous, time-wasting inspections. Work quotas were increased by a punitive margin. These were the actions of a bully, not a strategist. Petty harassment designed to provoke a reaction. He wanted us to break, to give him a reason to crush us openly. He still saw the garden as the primary conflict, a simple matter of real estate. He had no idea it was now just a symptom of a much deeper disease he had contracted. Mara cornered me outside the archive, her face etched with exhaustion and anger. "This is your fault," she hissed, her voice low. "This silent treatment, this passive resistance, it's making him angry, and he's taking it out on all of us." Griggs' crew just got hit with a triple shift for a minor infraction. People are at their breaking point. I met her gaze calmly. Anger makes people careless. Careless people get other people killed. "Kyle," she shot back. "While you're in here cataloging ghosts, the rest of us are living with the consequences. You have to do something." "I am," I said. "I'm listening." Her frustration was a physical force, radiating from her in waves. She threw her hands up in disgust and stalked away, leaving me alone in the humming corridor. She was right to be scared. Vex was backed into a corner, and cornered things are predictable. He made his next move 2 cycles later. The Helion 4 shipment was still a ghost on the shipping logs, and the construction schedule for his processing unit was now a shambles. To reassert his authority, he needed to make an example of his power. He chose the garden. This time there were no announcements, no warnings. A heavy demolition drone, a 6-legged monstrosity of durasteel and hydraulic claws, clanked into the hydroponics bay, flanked by a full squad of Vex's elite guards. The miners, alerted by a frantic call from Echo, came running. They formed a human wall in front of the drone, armed with nothing but their bodies and their fury. Griggs was at the front, his face a granite mask of grief and defiance. "You'll go through me first," he growled, the words echoing the doomed bravery of countless others I had logged in the archive. Vex appeared on a nearby view screen, his insectoid face a remote, impassive mask. "Your protest is noted and dismissed. The reclamation will now proceed. Stand aside, or you will be removed." The drone's primary claw whirred to life, a sound like the grinding of bones. This was the moment, the spark meeting the tinder. In seconds, there would be a riot, followed by a massacre, followed by a purge. Mara's diplomacy had failed. The miners' defiance was about to become a suicide pact. And I, the quiet man in the quiet room, knew it was time for the second screw to turn. I hadn't been idle during the delay Jorik had bought me. I had been digging deeper, searching for a new point of leverage, one that was not out in the cold of space, but right here, in the hot, dusty heart of the gyre. I found it in the maintenance logs for the primary atmospheric scrubbers in the deep shafts. The Stroma believed the system was automated, monitored by their central hive AI. The official schematics said as much, but the archive told a different story. Decades of unlogged field modifications, jury-rigged bypasses, and esoteric recalibrations, all performed by human engineers, had turned the system into a temperamental beast that only a handful of humans truly understood. It was a network of institutional knowledge, a ghost in the machine that didn't appear on any diagnostic reports. The chief engineer who knew its secrets best was, of course, Griggs. The night before, I had found him in the mess hall, staring into a cup of stale synth coffee. I didn't give him orders. I didn't need to. I just sat down and started talking about his father, about the way he could diagnose a failing pressure valve just by the pitch of its hum. We talked about how some things can't be written down in a manual, how some knowledge lives only in the hands that do the work. I never mentioned the scrubbers. I simply reminded him of the value of memory. Now, as Vex gave the order for the demolition drone to advance, and as the first miner tensed to throw a punch, he would never land. A klaxon began to blare throughout the station. It wasn't the red alert of an attack, but the urgent, pulsing yellow of a critical system failure. On the view screen, Vex's face was replaced by a flashing schematic of the deep shafts, showing cascading pressure warnings in shafts 4 through 9. Atmospheric contamination alert. The text read, "All mining operations halted." Vex's head snapped toward an unseen subordinate. His translated voice, for the first time, held a trace of something other than arrogance confusion. "What is the cause? The diagnostics show all systems are green." The demolition drone froze, its claw hovering inches from the first row of lunamoths. The guards hesitated, their attention diverted by the station-wide alarm. The confrontation at the garden, a moment before a bloody explosion, was suddenly irrelevant, a sideshow to a far more pressing crisis. Every minute, the deep shaft mines were offline. Vex's production quotas were bleeding out. His 6% efficiency gain from the new processing unit was a joke compared to the catastrophic losses he was now facing. He barked a series of clipped orders. The drone and the guards were recalled, their heavy footsteps a sound of retreat. They were being redeployed to the deep shafts to solve a problem they didn't even understand they had. The miners stood in stunned silence, their fists slowly unclenching. They looked at each other, then at Griggs, who stood staring at the retreating drone, a slower, knowing smile spreading across his weary face. Back in the archive, I watched it all unfold on the security feeds. I saw Vex arrive in the shaft control room, his polished carapace reflecting the flashing yellow lights. I watched as his stroma technicians ran their useless diagnostics, their reports conflicting with the reality of failing pressure seals and rising toxicity levels. They were trying to read a book written in a language they couldn't speak. Finally, defeated. Vex was forced to summon the human engineering team. He was forced to ask Griggs, the man whose father's memorial he had just tried to destroy, for help. It was a humiliation far deeper than any physical blow. I opened a new entry in the Covenant of Scars. It wasn't a record of a death or an injury. It was a tactical analysis. Subject Hive Supervisor Vex. Method weaponized inefficiency. Result primary objective preservation of cultural memorial achieved. Secondary objective humiliation of subject. Demonstration of human operational indispensability achieved. Status ongoing. I looked at the live feed of the garden. Echo was there, calmly tending to a bruised fern. The survey drone gone. The immediate threat had passed. But I knew this was only the second move in a long and dangerous game. I had shown Vex that our sentimentality was a shield. Now, he would learn that our memory could also be a sword, and his next move, born of this fresh humiliation, would not be against a patch of dirt. It would be against the knowledge itself. It would be against me. The victory, when it came, was as quiet as the hum of the newly stable atmospheric scrubbers. Griggs and his engineering team emerged from the deep shafts coated in grime and smelling of ozone, but they walked with a new swagger. They had taken their time, citing phantom pressure leaks and the need for triple redundant safety checks, stretching a 6-hour job into 2 full cycles. For 2 days, the stroma mining operations had been crippled, their precious quotas a distant memory. For 2 days, Hive Supervisor Vex had been forced to stand by, impotent, while the very humans he disdained held the station's economic lifeblood in their grease-stained hands. He had been forced to sign off on their overtime, approve their equipment requests, and endure their slow, deliberate work. The humiliation was a poison that now seeped through his every command. The garden was safe, for now. Vex had not mentioned it again, and the demolition drone sat inert in a cargo bay, a monument to his failed power play. The human sector breathed a collective sigh of relief, but it was a shallow breath, one taken with an eye on the shadows. They knew, on a primal level, that they had not won a war, merely a battle, and that the enemy was learning. Mara found me in the blue-lit gloom of the archive. The hard, combative lines on her face had softened into something more complex, a mixture of grudging respect and deep-seated worry. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching me collate the sensor data from the scrubber repairs. "They're calling Griggs the Ghost Whisperer," she said, her voice lacking its usual abrasive edge. "They think he's some kind of mechanical shaman. They don't know it was you." "It wasn't me," I replied, turning from the console. It was the memory of every engineer who ever fixed a leaky valve with a scrap of metal and a prayer. It was Abram Griggs, knowing his son wouldn't let his memorial be paved over. The knowledge was already there. I just pointed to the right page. She stepped inside, the heavy door hissing shut behind her, sealing us in the quiet heart of our history. What's next? Kyle, he's not going to let this go. You outmaneuvered him, embarrassed him in front of his hive. A creature like Vex doesn't forget a wound to its pride. No, I agreed, my gaze sweeping across the glowing data stacks that represented centuries of human pain and perseverance. He won't. He has now identified two tactical weaknesses in his own operation: an external supply dependency and an internal knowledge gap. He'll move to correct them, but first, he will try to eliminate the source of his problem. He thinks it's this room. He thinks the Covenant is a server full of data. He's going to come for the archive. The fear in her eyes was real. We can't defend this place. Not against a full Stroma assault. We won't have to, I said, a plan that had been forming in the back of my mind now solidifying into a cold, hard certainty. We're going to deconstruct it, not the physical space, the knowledge. An archive that exists in only one place is a target. An archive that lives in the minds of 100 people is a resistance. For the next 3 cycles, under the cover of routine maintenance and casual conversations, we began the transfer. It was the most dangerous work I had ever done. I wasn't moving data. I was planting secrets. I met with a grizzled dockworker named Lena and gave her the encrypted shipping schedules for Vex's personal luxury goods from the core worlds, a violation of Hive austerity protocols that would see him stripped of his rank if exposed. I sat with the cook in the mess hall and, while complaining about the quality of the synth meat, casually mentioned the Stroma commander in charge of station security, a man with a crippling gambling addiction and debts to an off-world crime syndicate, information I'd gleaned from intercepted private transmissions, to a young, bright-eyed technician. I passed along the structural weaknesses of the Stroma barracks, pinpointing the one support pylon that, if compromised, would cause a catastrophic power failure to their entire sector. Each piece of information was a loaded gun, given to a trusted hand. They didn't know what the others had received. They only knew that I had given them a secret of their own, a single very sharp stone to carry in their pocket. The archive was ceasing to be a place. It was becoming a people. Vex's official move came on the 4th cycle. It was an elegant piece of corporate warfare, wrapped in the language of cooperation. A station-wide memo announced a joint systems integrity audit, a comprehensive review of all operational protocols and data logs to enhance synergistic efficiency and prevent future system-wide failures. The memo specifically stated that the audit would require direct, unimpeded access to all data storage facilities, including Sector 7's Human Cultural Archive. He was using our own victory against us, framing his intrusion as a logical consequence of the scrubber incident. He was coming for us with a clipboard and a warrant. Mara, now my full co-conspirator, drafted the official response. It was a masterpiece of polite, unyielding obstruction. Citing the same cultural preservation clauses as before, she argued that the archive was a place of historical and emotional significance, not an operational database. Its contents, she wrote, were the unquantifiable and deeply personal records of a sovereign people and were therefore outside the purview of a technical audit. She offered to provide a curated summary of any relevant data, an offer she knew he would refuse. The diplomatic dance was over. We had refused his legal request. Now he would come with force. The attack was as insidious as I had predicted. It didn't start with a battering ram, but with a fire alarm. A deliberately overloaded power conduit in the corridor adjacent to the archive sparked and burst, filling the area with acrid smoke. Station protocols, now under Vex's direct control, kicked in. Red lights flashed. Automated bulkheads slammed down, isolating the sector. And then the station's automated voice, cold and impersonal, announced the critical part. Emergency protocol initiated. Fire suppression system in Sector 7. Sub-level 3 deploying. All personnel evacuate. The Stroma fire suppression system was not water or foam. It was a high-frequency electromagnetic pulse, followed by a wave of aerosolized corrosive agents designed to instantly smother electrical fires and dissolve volatile materials. It was also brutally effective at wiping data cores and turning delicate archival equipment into slag. It was the perfect, deniable assassination of a room full of history. But the people who held the archive's secrets were already moving. Lena, the dock worker, having received a coded warning from me an hour earlier, used her knowledge of the cargo transit system to accidentally misroute a series of heavy ore containers, creating an impassable barricade on the primary access route for the Stroma emergency response team. The security chief's gambling debts, whispered to the right people by the mess hall cook, had resulted in his entire squad being inexplicably delayed by a personnel screening at the station's main checkpoint. A screening ordered by a rival Stroma faction I had anonymously tipped off. While the Stroma were bogged down by a series of perfectly timed accidents, the human response, coordinated by Mara, was a symphony of precise, controlled chaos. They didn't fight. They worked. Using their intimate knowledge of the station's labyrinthine service tunnels, they bypassed the sealed bulkheads. An engineering team rerouted power from the fire suppression system's primary capacitor, causing it to sputter and fail at the critical moment. Another team vented pressurized nitrogen into the corridor, not enough to be lethal, but thick enough to render the Stroma's optical sensors useless, forcing them to navigate by feel through a maze they didn't understand. Inside the archive, I was alone. The lights flickered and died as the power was rerouted, leaving me in the glow of a single emergency lamp. On the main console, I wasn't downloading, I was erasing. Hollow screen after hollow screen went dark as I initiated a full, cascading data purge, a digital bonfire of our most sacred memories, It was a performance for the benefit of any remote sensors Vex still had active. I had to make him believe he was about to capture an empty prize. As the purge reached its final stages, I executed the real program. It wasn't an upload, it was a ghost. A dormant logic bomb, woven into the station's core operating system, now linked to the archive's own internal sensors, a dead man's switch. If the physical data cores were breached or forcibly removed, the bomb would activate, systematically corrupting every piece of Stroma operational data, from their mining schedules to their life support systems. It was a mutual self-destruct pact, a final unbreakable shield. The heavy thud of magnetic boots echoed in the corridor outside. They had finally broken through. A plasma torch hissed, cutting through the sealed door. I leaned back in my chair, the last hollow screen winking out, plunging the room into near total darkness. The door exploded inward, and the silhouettes of Stroma guards, rifles raised, filled the opening. A voice crackled over their comms. Vex's voice, sharp with triumph. "Secure the archivist. Do not let him destroy the core." A guard pinned me against the wall, his grip like steel. Another ripped the panel off the main data hub, preparing to extract the central memory core. I didn't struggle. I just looked past them, into the lens of the lead guard's helmet camera, knowing Vex was watching. I smiled, the expression feeling strange and powerful in the dim light. "You're too late," I said, my voice calm and clear, echoing slightly in the sudden silence of the dead room. "You think you can kill a memory by burning the library? The archive isn't data anymore. It's a ghost, and is going to haunt you." The guard paused, his claws hovering over the core, sensing something was wrong. In that moment of hesitation, Vex, for the first time, must have felt a cold, alien emotion creep into his logical mind, the icy dread of a trap already sprung. The silence in the archive was a living thing, a coiled predator. The Stroma guard's claws remained frozen over the memory core, the tactical lights on his helmet casting long, dancing shadows across the dead consoles. Through the guard's helmet cam, I could almost feel Vex's analytical mind racing, processing my words, searching for the trick, the hidden variable in an equation he thought he had already solved. He saw a ruined room, a captured archivist, and a prize within his grasp. He couldn't see the web of ghosts I had woven into the station's very bones. "Extract the core," Vex's voice commanded, the bravado in it sounding thin, brittle. Ignore his theatrics. The guard obeyed, his claws closing around the cylindrical data core. The moment they made contact, a soft chime, pleasant and innocuous, echoed from the main console. On the guard's helmet display, a single line of human text bloomed into existence. Simple and stark, Covenant protocol active. Vex's voice was a choked hiss. "What is that? What did you do?" Before I could answer, the station itself screamed. Not a klaxon, but a sound of pure digital agony. Every view screen in the Stroma sector simultaneously went black. The humming of their environmental controls fell silent. The automated ore conveyors ground to a screeching halt. Across the gyre, every system, every database, every piece of operational software controlled by the Stroma Hive AI began to hemorrhage data, a cascade of corruption spreading through their network like a virus. It was my ghost in the machine. The logic bomb awakened. It wasn't destroying their systems. It was rewriting them with garbage, turning their perfect, ordered world into a babbling chaos of nonsense. The guards in the archive staggered as their own heads-up displays filled with corrupted text, their comms crackling with static. The guard holding me released his grip, his attention consumed by the technological meltdown unfolding before his eyes. "You didn't just build a shield," Mara's voice crackled over a hidden personal comm link I wore, a channel completely separate from the station's compromised network. "You built a guillotine." In the Stroma command center, Vex was watching his empire crumble. The vital signs of his operation were flatlining. He was blind, deaf, and paralyzed. He had tried to seize our history, and in response, I had erased his present. But this was only the opening salvo. The second wave of the attack was already in motion, and it was entirely human. Lena, the dock worker, used the system-wide confusion to seal the primary blast doors to the Stroma docking bay, trapping their internal security fleet. She didn't use a hacked console. She used a manual override lever that hadn't been in the official Stroma schematics for 50 years. A lever whose existence was only recorded in a faded maintenance log in my now purged archive. The mess hall cook, a man whose quiet demeanor hid a savant-like understanding of the station's nutrient-paced distribution network, rerouted the Stroma's primary food supply to the human sector's emergency reserves. He didn't hack a server. He just turned a series of physical valves in a forgotten service conduit, a sequence known only to him and Griggs, the Ghost Whisperer. He performed the master stroke. The atmospheric scrubbers, his domain, were now under his complete manual control. He didn't release toxins. He did something far more insidious. He began to slowly, almost imperceptibly, alter the oxygen mix in the Stroma sectors. Not enough to be lethal, but enough to trigger a mild, persistent lethargy in their insectoid physiology. A cognitive sluggishness that would dull their reflexes and cloud their hive mind's judgment. It was a subtle and debilitating attack on their very essence, turning the air they breathed into a weapon against them. This was the true covenant of scars. It wasn't a database. It was the collective, institutional memory of a people who had learned to survive in the cracks of a world that was not their own. It was 1,000 tiny, unlogged secrets, 1,000 forgotten skills, 1,000 remembered debts, all woven together into an unbreakable net. Vex was a general with a perfect map of the battlefield, utterly unaware that we were fighting him from a dimension he didn't even know existed. His response, when it came, was one of pure, animalistic rage. He could no longer trust his technology, so he fell back on the oldest tool of all brute force. He managed to get a message out on a hard-line emergency channel to the one place my virus hadn't touched the heavily armed Stroma cruiser that maintained a geosynchronous orbit above the gyre. His message was simple: purge the human sector. Level it. It was the move I had been waiting for. The final, desperate act of a tyrant who had lost control. It was also the gravest miscalculation of his career. As the cruiser began its descent, its weapon ports glowing with malevolent energy, it received a Priority 1 hail, not from me, not from Mara. It came from the Sector Guild Authority, the overarching corporate body that governed all mining operations in the region. The message that flashed across the cruiser captain's screen was not a request. It was an order. It contained a meticulously detailed file outlining Hive Supervisor Vex's repeated violations of Guild austerity protocols, the luxury goods, the off-the-books expenditures, the secret accounts. It included evidence of his association with known criminal syndicates, the security chief's gambling debts, which Vex had been leveraging for his own purposes, and it contained a damning audio file, a recording of his purge order, a clear violation of the Core Accord's articles on collective punishment. My network of ghosts was larger than Vex could have ever imagined. Lena hadn't just received shipping schedules. She had received the means to transmit them. The cook hadn't just received blackmail material. He had received a contact within a rival Stroma faction eager to see Vex fall. The message to the guild was my checkmate. Vex had tried to frame his war against us as an internal station matter. I had just made it a criminal investigation. The Stroma cruiser captain, a being whose primary loyalty was to the guild's profit margins, not to a disgraced and reckless supervisor, was now faced with a choice: follow an illegal order and become an accessory to a war crime, or cut his losses. The choice was logical. Inefficient outcomes were to be avoided. The cruiser's weapon ports went dark. Its engines flared. Not to attack, but to pull back, to disengage. Vex was on his own. I watched all this unfold from the main view screen in the human mess hall, where Mara had brought me after Griggs's team rescued me from the now powerless Stroma guards. The room was packed with miners, technicians, and cooks, their faces illuminated by the screen, watching the Stroma cruiser retreat. A slow, spreading cheer began to build, a wave of disbelief and elation. They had won. They had faced down the hive and broken it. But I felt a cold knot in my stomach. I looked at Mara, and she saw it in my eyes. "It's not over," she said, her voice a low murmur amidst the celebration. "No," I said. "He's lost his ship, his systems, and his authority. He has nothing left to lose, and a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing in the universe." The station's public address system, dead for hours, suddenly crackled to life. It wasn't the automated voice. It was Vex. His voice was ragged, stripped of its synthetic politeness, raw, with a fury that was almost human. "You think you have won, archivist," he snarled, his voice echoing through the corridors of the gyre. "You have taken my station, but you have forgotten one thing. You may have 1,000 secrets, but I only need one of yours." There was a click, and then a new sound filled the speakers. It was the sound of a child crying, and then Echo's small, terrified voice. Kale, I'm scared." My blood ran cold. The celebration in the mess hall died instantly. Vex had done the one thing I hadn't anticipated. He hadn't attacked our systems or our infrastructure. He had gone for our heart. He had taken the child from the garden, the processing unit in the hydroponics bay. Vex's voice continued, chillingly calm now. "The one you fought so hard to stop. It seems I will have a use for it after all. You have 1 hour to surrender yourself to me, alone and unarmed, at the bay doors. If you are not there, I will demonstrate the true meaning of the word processing. Your move. Archivist." The line went dead, leaving behind a silence more profound and terrible than any alarm. The triumphant shouts in the mess hall died, replaced by a vacuum of absolute horror. Hope, so bright and sharp only a moment before, shattered into a million pieces. Men who had stood firm against demolition drones and armed guards now looked pale and lost. Vex had found the one variable they couldn't account for, the one target they couldn't harden. He had taken their future. Mara grabbed my arm, her grip like a vice. "You're not going. We'll storm the bay. We'll blow the damn doors." Griggs was already nodding, his face a thundercloud. "We can cut the power, flood it with stun gas. He's one bug. Kyle. We're 100 strong. I gently removed Mara's hand from my arm. And what happens to Echo while we do that? He's standing next to an ore processor, the slightest sign of an organized attack, and he'll drop her in. No, this isn't a tactical problem anymore. I looked around the silent room, at the faces of my people, the living, breathing archive I had created. He doesn't want to fight. He wants a symbol. He needs to prove to himself, and to whatever is left of his world, that our sentimentality is a flaw, a weakness he can execute. He needs me to walk in there and beg. He needs to see me break. A cold, terrible calm settled over me. I am the keeper of the covenant. This is my final entry. I have to deliver it myself. The walk to the hydroponics bay was the longest of my life. The corridors were empty, the silence punctuated by the distant, rhythmic thud of a failing pump. I passed the sealed doors of the stroma sector, behind which a broken hive was trying to make sense of its new, chaotic reality. I passed the mess hall, now a silent vigil. I passed the entrance to the deep shafts, where Griggs had won us our first victory. Every step was a ghost, every corner a memory. I was not walking as Kalen, the quiet man from the quiet room. I was walking as the embodiment of every name in the garden, every slight logged in the archive, every human who had ever been wronged and remembered. I was unarmed, as Vex had demanded. I carried no weapon, no tool, no hidden device. My only weapon was the one Vex could never comprehend the truth. The bay doors hissed open. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp earth and the low, menacing hum of the ore processor's standby cycle. The garden, our sanctuary, had been desecrated. Plants were overturned, the nickel nameplates scattered. In the center of the chaos stood Vex. His polished black carapace was cracked and scuffed. One of his limbs bent at an unnatural angle. He looked less like a supervisor and more like a predator brought to bay. He held Echo in front of him, one massive claw wrapped loosely around her small body. She was crying silently, her face smudged with dirt and tears. "Archivist," Vex rasped, his translator stripping the emotion from his voice but not the venom from his intent. "You came, I confess. I thought your species' famed irrationality might lead you to a more suicidal group action. I'm glad to see you have a sliver of logic left." He gestured with a free claw toward the gaping maw of the processor. "This machine is a model of efficiency. It can render 6 tons of raw nickel ore into dust in under a minute. Imagine what it could do to something so soft. All of your history, all of your pain, reduced to a single, quantifiable act of loss, a fitting end for your sentimental little rebellion." I stopped a dozen paces from him, my hands held open at my sides. I looked at Echo, and, for a second, my resolve wavered. The sight of her terror was a physical blow. But then I looked at Vex, and I saw not a monster, but a creature terrified of a truth he could not compute. "You're wrong," I said, my voice steady, amplified by the cavernous space. "You think this is about her. You think she is my weakness. You are mistaken. She is our strength, her devotion to this place, to these names. That is the source of the power you cannot understand." Vex clicked his mandibles in irritation. "Spare me your illogical poetry. You lost the moment I took her. Now, you will kneel. You will erase the Covenant Protocol. You will restore my systems. You will undo everything you have done." I took another step forward. "I can't do that, because the Covenant is not a protocol. Vex, it's a memory. and I am not its master. I am merely its voice. And then I began to speak. I did not raise my voice. I spoke as if I were cataloging a new entry, my tone calm and precise. Entry 4712, Hive Supervisor Vex, brood of the third ovum, designated inferior by the core hive due to a recessive genetic marker for mandible asymmetry, a trait associated with emotional instability. Vex flinched, a barely perceptible tremor. Lies. Entry 4713. I continued, my voice unwavering. The third ovum brood was deliberately sacrificed during the Scylla Prime campaign by order of the core hive. They were sent in as a diversion, their losses deemed an acceptable and efficient expenditure to preserve the genetically pure first and second broods. The official record calls them heroes. The ship logs I found buried in a forgotten freighter's data core call them bait. I took another step. Vex's grip on Echo tightened. "Where did you get this?" he hissed. "From the ghosts, Vex, from the memories you discard. You see, you're not the pinnacle of logic you believe yourself to be. You are the descendant of inefficient, emotional beings who were thrown away by their own hive because they were flawed. Your obsession with efficiency, your hatred for sentiment, it's not logic. It's the fear of a creature who is terrified he will be seen for what he truly is, a broken piece of a broken history." I was in front of him now, close enough to see the confusion warring with the rage in his multifaceted eyes. "This ends now, Vex, not because you have a hostage, but because you have nowhere left to run. Your species lied to you. Your career is over. Your entire worldview is a fallacy." "I will kill her," he shrieked, the translator distorting his voice into a digital scream. He raised a claw, not to harm Echo, but to shove her toward the processor. In that final, desperate moment, his logic shattered completely, leaving only spite. But he never completed the motion. A low groan echoed from above, not from the station speakers, but from the station itself, with a sound of tortured metal. A massive ventilation duct, one of the primary conduits Griggs and his team had repaired, tore free from its ancient moorings. It did not fall on Vex. It fell directly in the path between him and the ore processor, a 2-ton wall of steel slamming into the deck with a deafening crash, kicking up a storm of dust and soil. Vex stumbled back, momentarily blinded, his attack thwarted. In that same instant, the bay's emergency lighting, long dormant, flared to life with a blinding white intensity. It was not a system-wide activation. It was a targeted, overwhelming blast of light, focused entirely on our position, a trick of the station's power grid that only a handful of human technicians knew how to perform. Vex, with his sensitive insectoid eyes, cried out and recoiled, throwing his claws up to shield his face, and in that 1 second of perfect, planned chaos, I lunged, not at Vex, at Echo. I scooped her into my arms, tucked her head against my chest, and rolled behind the twisted wreckage of the fallen duct. A moment later, a thick, white cloud of nitrogen gas, cold and suffocating, billowed from the very vents Vex had used to try and destroy the archive, flooding the space around the processor. It wasn't lethal, but it was unbreathable. When the gas cleared, Vex was on his knees, gasping, his fury replaced by the weary posture of defeat. Mara and Griggs stood at the entrance to the bay, flanked by a dozen miners. They were not armed with weapons, but with the tools of their trade wrenches, cutters, and the unyielding certainty of a people who had taken their home back. We did not kill Vex, Death would have been an efficient end, a release. Instead, we gave him a life sentence. We put him on a long-haul freighter bound for the Galactic core, stripped of his rank and his name, with a single data slate containing the full, unredacted history of his brood. We gave him the one thing he feared more than death, a memory he could never erase. The garden was rebuilt. Every nameplate was recovered, polished, and returned to its place in the soil. Echo, now with a streak of gray in her hair that hadn't been there before, tends to it still. Dorian Geyer is ours now, not by conquest, but by understanding. We are no longer tenants on a rock owned by others. We are its caretakers, its memory, its soul. The archive was never rebuilt. It doesn't need to be. It lives in the quiet confidence in Griggs's eyes, in the fierce loyalty of Mara's command, in the way Lena watches the shipping lanes. And it lives in the laughter of the children who play in the garden, safe and unafraid. The Covenant of Scars is no longer just a record of pain endured. It is a living promise of pain returned. The rule is known throughout the fringe systems now, whispered in the mess halls of freighters and the back rooms of trading posts. It is not a threat of war or a declaration of power. It is a simple statement of fact, proven in the dark corridors of a forgotten asteroid. There are things more dangerous than fleets and armies. There are ghosts. There are memories. And you don't hurt humans, because we remember everything.